Recorded live from Hong Kong and Toronto. Let's go! This is the PR and Law Podcast.
The PR and Law Podcast.
Turn it up. With your hosts, Cam McMurchie and Ewan Christie.
Welcome to episode 47 of the PR and Law Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McMurchie, along with Ewan Christie.
Hello, Cameron.
Ewan's an employment lawyer and partner at Duntroon LLP in Toronto, Canada, and his firm is online at duntroon.law. I'm a PR guy in Hong Kong and publisher of the Digital Bits PR and Communications newsletter at digitalbitspr.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please tell a friend, and you can follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and we're also on YouTube and SoundCloud, and you can get our newsletter too at PRLawPodcast.Club. So, Ewan, here we are. Lots happening in Hong Kong. What's happening over there in Canada?
Daylight savings, Cam. Daylight savings.
Right on. That's a big deal. So you lost an hour of sleep, right?
I did, and yet I gained an hour of sleep at the same time, Cam. And let me explain.
Please
because, do. I was out for a lovely walk. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon, and I came back and it's like I should start cooking dinner. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to put my head down for 5 minutes. And I woke up an hour later. And ordinarily that wouldn't have been an issue. But of course, we lost an hour because the clock sprung ahead. And I was kind of behind the eight ball and had to sort of scramble to get dinner together on time. But man, there's really, as you get older, and this is definitely like times where I feel like an old man, but where there are few things better in life than being able to squeeze in a nap on the weekend. I don't know about you, but it's just a glorious thing when you get to have one.
It's funny that you bring that up because I did that this weekend. I actually had to wake up early on Saturday to give a lecture at Poly University, Hong Kong Polytechnic University here on communications. I did one about 18 months ago. And I was sort of a guest lecturer for a communications class. But to do so, I had to wake up early. It was over Zoom because, schools are not in session that way yet. But because I was up early and it was a Saturday and it was a 3.5 hour, 4 hour class, which is a long time to talk. When it ended, I had lunch and then I thought, I'm tired. I'm going to lay down. And it was wonderful. Like I absolutely loved it. I wish I could do it every day, actually.
Yes. The daily nap would be incredible if such a thing was possible.
Yeah. Well, here things are getting tough again, especially on the COVID side, Ewan, because, I think I've said on this show a few times that we had basically no cases again for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And then, suddenly one guy who had it went to a gym in central Hong Kong, actually Sai Ying Pun to be more direct, which has resulted in more than 100 cases from this one sort of super spreader event. And because, there's trainers that go from gym to gym and help people out. And so it just spread like crazy. And even in mid-levels now, which is where I live, there's 4 buildings here now that are under complete lockdown. There's no people coming or going. So it's right in my neighborhood now, which is it's different. Again, it just went from nothing to many cases again. And another example of like you can get this virus under control, but the minute you really open things up, it can come back so quickly.
Yeah. Although I was just thinking for the majority of our listeners who don't live in Hong Kong, you might have to explain what you mean when you say mid-levels.
Yeah. Okay. Mid-levels. It's sort of partway up the mountain. So it's like there is a lower area and then a mid-levels, which is partway up, and then the peak, which is the top and very ritzy up there. But it is around central, and there's a lot of expatriates and stuff like that in this area. So it's this time it's sort of a lot of the banker crowd, people like that are dealing with COVID now for the first time, and it's kind of a scary time. And this goes hand in hand with electoral reform in Hong Kong, which is a very boring subject, I'm sure, to most of our readers. But suffice to say, Beijing has basically removed any possibility of a pro-democracy candidate from winning election. So, we are firmly in Beijing's control. No doubt about that.
I read about that. It made news here. Hey man, I'm sorry. I don't really know what else to say because what can be done, right? At
exactly.
This point, that
Yep. And, this is I always tell people this I think I even said this in my class on Saturday. Like, there are things you can control and influence and things you cannot. And for the things you cannot, just no sense in really even thinking about it. It's some people think that's kind of a defeatist attitude, but if you really have no power, no control, or no influence, then you should kind of channel your energy into other areas.
Continue the debate with us on social media. Join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PR Law Podcast. All one word, PRLAW Podcast. Send us your questions now by email to askus@PRLawPodcast.com. That's all one word, askus@PRLawPodcast.com, or on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. That's hashtag PRLAWPOD.
Take it away, Ewan.
All right, Cameron. Well, last week we were talking about things that employees and employers, for that matter, need to look out for in employment agreements, right? Mm-hmm. They're looking at an agreement, thinking about starting a new job, and too many employees, as we've discussed, they just sign off on the dotted line and they don't really do their due diligence in terms of going through the agreement or having somebody look at it. So, last week we really focused on that idea of the termination clause really being critically important in terms of examining what are your entitlements? What do you get if the employer lets you go or severs the employment relationship? What are your entitlements, and how it's critically important that you try and negotiate that provision as an employee, have somebody explain it to you. And if you're an employer, make sure it's drafted in a manner that is going to be enforceable should it ever get in front of the eyes of a judge in the court.
So what does that mean, though? Can I stop you for a second? What does enforceable mean in this case?
Well, so generally speaking, enforceability revolves around the idea of, is the language consistent with the statutory provisions in the common law? So you can't draft language in an agreement that is inconsistent with a particular statutory provision or with case law.
Okay,
right?
so that would mean
it has to be consistent.
So, for example, you couldn't contract somebody to work 22 hours a day kind of thing because there's laws around this.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? So the fundamental premise is it doesn't matter if you're an employee and somebody tries to get you to sign an agreement where you would effectively be contracting out of your entitlements under a particular law, then that contract by definition is unenforceable. It has to be consistent with the laws of the land, regardless of what it is that you're contracting for. Right? That's the general idea.
Got it.
But this week, Cam, I wanted to talk about some of the other provisions that frequently come up. The first one I wanted to talk about has become a much bigger issue post-COVID, and that is the temporary layoff clause. So this was something we didn't really see all that much of in a pre-pandemic world. Mm-hmm. Typically, the only sort of employment agreements where you'd see temporary layoff provisions were seasonal workers was the big one where, you have employees who are only working certain months of the year. And, the employer obviously cannot keep them on payroll the entire 12 months of the year. So they sort of build a clause into the agreement where it's understood between the parties that during off seasons, they'll be temporarily laid off and then they'll come back when the work returns. Factory work, you often see these kinds of provisions as well. Well, in a post-COVID world, we're starting to see a lot more of these in agreements where employers quite rightly are trying to protect themselves against, a further wave of the pandemic or another pandemic. Again, and this is the sort of stuff that employers hadn't really turned their minds to because we've never really had to turn our minds to it. But they're certainly conscious of it now, and they're starting to insert a lot of language and provisions that gives them the discretion to temporarily lay an employee off should they need to do so.
Now, you said that, it's sort of natural now that employers are turning their attention to this because of what has happened with COVID and likely to happen again. Actually, I've heard recently several times that, another pandemic is coming and maybe not too long either, just the way the kind of world's going. But is this good for employees? Because I feel like this is at the very beginning of this process, we talked about how employers can kind of lay people off now and blame it on the pandemic, even if it's not because of the pandemic, even if it's because they just wanted to let a particular person go. And they kind of had an excuse. It kind of legitimized it to some degree. And do you think that this is kind of along those same lines? I feel like it's easy for employers now to point to the pandemic and say, look, this kind of thing happened, so now we need to have some clauses written in here where we can just, temporarily lay you off and make it easier to do so. Is it good for employees?
Well, no, I don't see why. I don't see how it could ever possibly be good for an employee to have the, give the discretion to the employer to temporarily lay you off. But I mean, going more specifically to your question, Cam, I mean, I think the larger issue isn't so much that we're seeing temporary layoff clause that contemplate, hey, if we find ourselves in a pandemic situation again somewhere down the road, or there's a further wave, that under that narrow scope, we have the discretion to temporarily lay you off. What I'm seeing more frequently is a really broad provision where effectively the employer has sole discretion to temporarily lay an employee off, regardless of what the situation is, simply on the basis of shortage of work. Well, shortage of work meaning what? And as determined by who? And based upon what factors, or, what drop in production or profits or whatever measure of work the employer is relying on. I mean, unless you're narrowing the scope of that language, it gives an employer a great deal of discretion. Now, if you're drafting an agreement like that for an employer, then obviously, you as an employer want to have as much latitude as you possibly can. And you want that provision to read as broadly as possible. But of course, if you're on the other side of the fence as an employee, then you want to do everything you can to either get it eliminated to begin with in its entirety, or if it's going to be there, at least ensure that the scope is very, very narrowly focused.
Yeah, no, that's completely understandable. That's their interests, right, on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I mean, again, this just sort of goes back to that fundamental issue, much like the termination clause, much like everything else. Sit down with someone who looks at agreements on a regular basis and make sure you're reviewing it, or look at it yourself and at least, have some sense as to whether or not you have any language in your agreement. And if you do, well, then the next step obviously is to take it to somebody who understands what language should be there, what shouldn't be there, and how you can possibly revise it. But, you have to look at the agreement and see if you have some sort of contemplated layoff provisions, because we're starting to see more and more of them, Cam, and it really, I think, this is going to be a big deal going forward. Yeah,
and you just said sit down with a lawyer or read it yourself, and actually, I think the read it yourself part is really important too. I mean, a lot of people do assume, and we touched on this previously, that if they're being recruited or they're being considered for a role and then hired for a role, there's a lot of positive vibes around that, sort of like getting married, and so you assume that they're going to have sort of your best interests at heart to some degree. I think a lot of people do think that way. And because it's the beginning of this relationship, right? So both sides are feeling pretty good. But the employer side is always going to cover their bases for sure. And it is incumbent upon the person signing that contract to at least review it. And even if legalese bores you, or if this seems like a huge chore, it's worth your time to go through it. It is your employment after all, and it can touch on every factor of your life. And so it is worth going through, or hiring somebody to go through.
Let me be clear. When I say read it yourself, I'm not saying that because I would not suggest that, I've read this myself, I'm sure everything's fine. No, what I'm saying is that these are specific provisions that you want to look for. And if you see something in your agreement that says temporary layoff provision, or anything with that combination of words in a given sentence, that should be, the red light going off in your mind of, what, I should really sit down with somebody and go through this and make sure I know what it is that I'm signing. That really has to be the next step.
So Ewan, you said you're seeing more of this, right? Like this is going to be a trend that is probably going to pick up steam.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I mean, and here's the thing. I mean, as an employer, you can include a temporary layoff provision and effectively know that the individual that you're giving the agreement to isn't going to push back on it, then why wouldn't you give yourself that additional discretion? Why wouldn't you protect your business in that regard, right? So, I mean, really, there's no reason not to do it as an employer, unless you're going to get a certain level of pushback from the employee. And then we get into sort of that position that we were talking about last week around termination clauses, of how much negotiating power do you have as an employee in this situation? You know, maybe that's a deal breaker for you. Maybe you're prepared to say, you know what, I'm not going to take this job unless you remove that particular clause. And then the employer has to make a decision in terms of how much they really want that particular employee for that particular role.
Right on. Okay. Anything else to add on this one, Ewan, or any other pieces of wisdom that you would like to impart?
No, I don't think so. I did want to sort of quickly touch upon one other thing that's coming up, Cam, and this is sort of relevant to remote work, and that's governing jurisdiction of the agreement. I know you and I have talked about this before. It's a really complicated issue, and it's not something, unfortunately, that we can give really, really clear counsel on, other than, again, this is something that you need to sit down with counsel locally to discuss. Because with all of the remote work that we're having, we're starting to see now, Cam, agreements where you have an employee who lives in, I don't know, Ontario, for example, that's signing an agreement with a company that's based in, say, British Columbia or maybe California. And you go through the agreement and you realize that there's a provision in the agreement that says that that individual will be bound by the laws of British Columbia, for example, despite the fact that they work in Ontario. Well, as an employer, you may want to hold that individual to the jurisdictional law of that particular province, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the jurisdiction that's going to govern. So if you have an employee in Ontario, for example, and they live in Ontario, they're working in Ontario, they're paying Ontario taxes. Maybe there's, a sort of satellite office of the company that's based in Toronto, for example. So, maybe once a week they're going to that satellite office in Toronto. And despite the fact that the company's headquartered in BC and you've signed an agreement under BC law, you're likely bound by the laws of Ontario and not the laws of BC. So this is really, really something that employees working abroad need to look into, because just because you're signing an agreement that says you'll be bound by the law of a particular country or a particular province, that's not necessarily the law that's going to govern. You need to sit down with counsel locally and have a determination as to what law am I bound by? Because obviously that's going to have all kinds of significance, again, in terms of your entitlements upon termination, the enforceability of certain provisions in the agreement, all of this stuff. And this, again, Cam, this is going to be another huge, huge, huge issue going forward with so many people working remotely.
Show your support to the PR and Law podcast by making a one-time donation or setting up a subscription with us on Patreon. Every little bit helps us keep the lights on and bring the show to you each week. If you'd like to chip in, please visit PRLawPodcast.com. That's PRLawPodcast.com. Click support the show. Thanks for helping us out.
All right, Ewan, I wanted to talk today about companies and making very public mistakes that land them in some hot water. And it pertains to Burger King this week. But before I mention that, actually, Amazon ran into a similar problem. So let me start at the beginning here. Amazon released a new logo for its phone app in January, I believe. It was in February, and it was corrected on March 1st. So in February, it was a logo that had the sort of Amazon smile, the sort of A to Z part of the logo, and then a sort of some tape, like it's sealed like a box over the top, but it had what many people felt looked like a Hitler mustache, the way that this sort of seal was put on this box with the smile. It's hard to describe. I will put a link in the show notes. I didn't notice that right away. I can see how people would, though, based on having a look at it. And this was embarrassing for Amazon. And they changed it pretty quickly. to a different sort of piece of tape for that box that removed any confusion. And so they ran into some trouble with that. And this was clearly inadvertent, or I assume it was inadvertent. I don't think Amazon was trying to replicate Hitler on its app icon. Burger King, though, kind of went into this on purpose. And you and I don't know if you've heard about this, but Burger King put out kind of an ad or a promotion on International Women's Day. Now, International Women's Day was last Monday, and it's a big deal. Like I remember when I moved to Asia and China in particular, even in the mid 2000s, it was a major day. So is Kids Day, Children's Day. Both of these days in China are really, really big. And so International Women's Day rolled around on Monday as usual. And Burger King put out a tweet to mark the occasion. And it contained just 5 words. But those 5 words caused quite an uproar. Burger King then put out a second tweet right afterwards, which helped to explain the first tweet. So what on earth am I talking about? I'm actually going to turn it over to Bill Maher, who's a U.S. late-night talk show host on HBO, and he addressed this scandal and explains it on his show from Friday.
Burger King was trying to be funny in an ad, and I think they were funny. They were talking about a program they have to increase the number of women chefs. There aren't a comparative number of women chefs in the world. Maybe they should get more opportunities. Maybe there's a reason why they don't, and we should address that. That's what they were trying to say.
Right.
So they had an ad, women belong in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, I didn't see that.
And, of course, the shit hit the fan, their usual suspects. And I just want to say, this is what's wrong with us. It's like, if you don't get the joke here, then you're stupid. You don't get subtlety, you don't get humor, you don't get perspective. And if you do, and you're pretending that you don't, just so you can have something to be pissed off at, then both ways you're gross.
All right, Ewan, what did you think when you heard about this?
When I heard Mars comment, or when I heard the initial I saw it, Cam. Look, I get it. I get Mars' point, but I also don't think that because you look at the ad critically that doesn't mean you don't have a sense of humor. I don't think it means you're being overly sensitive. Burger King was clearly looking to get people's attention. They were clearly looking to incite some level of controversy around the particular phrasing. And look, I mean, they're right. I mean, as you know, in a previous life, Cam, I worked in kitchens, and it's exactly what you think it is. It's a particularly gendered environment. It is not an environment that historically has been inclusive or something that a comfortable space for women to move into. That's clearly what Burger King was touching on. But why? But I mean, again, why? I mean, on International Women's Day, why did that have to be the position? You could have gone so many other ways. Why was that the direction that they went? I don't get it. And I think Maher is off base. I get it. He's trying to conflate too many issues. He's saying that if you find this inappropriate or marginally offensive, then you don't have a sense of humor, or you're some sort of woke social justice warrior, is kind of common parlance that I know he likes to use. I don't think it means that at all. I think you can look at it and say, no, that was a really stupid advertising campaign to drop on International Women's Day. And it doesn't have to be anything more than that.
So I just want to push back on one thing that you said there. You said they were clearly trying to incite controversy, and I really don't think that's the case. I do think that Burger King was trying to get attention, but I don't think they were trying to incite controversy. And those are two very different things. There's a fine line between them. I do think companies try and avoid controversy as much as possible. They're just wired that way. But you do want to do something creative to get attention. And sometimes those two things come together, and I think PR agencies or comms teams would not want them to come together. They'd want to split them into two. So I don't think they were actually trying to create this kind of controversy out of it, but I do think they were trying to be talked about, which is a little bit different. So I want to address this. And now the reason I chose this is because there's a message in here that applies to almost everything out of communications. And there's two parts to this issue to me. There's two main sort of sides to it, two main factors here. One, the appropriateness of the joke. Two, the risk of the joke. So, I mean, people think these are the same thing, but they're not. Like, in terms of the appropriateness of the joke, it doesn't matter ultimately if you think it's appropriate or not. And this is where sort of Bill Maher was going with it. It's completely beside the point, because should people be angry about the tweet? In my view, I would say no. I think the tweet was sent out to shock people and get attention, and then it was followed by details of a program aimed at bringing more women into the workforce. So that second tweet, and this is exactly what it said. So the first tweet said, women belong in the kitchen. The second tweet said, if they want to, of course, yet only 20% of chefs are women. We're on a mission to change the gender ratio in the restaurant industry by empowering female employees with the opportunity to pursue a culinary career. So if you take the original tweet devoid of any context, it's awful. But if you take the initial tweet and put it in the context of the second tweet, which it was, then it makes much more sense, and it was clear, and it was fine. So, I mean, that's my view in terms of the appropriateness. However, as I said, that part doesn't matter ultimately, because point number two is the risk. And it doesn't matter whether it's appropriate or not, because someone in Burger King felt that it was, obviously, and maybe more people felt that it was, not just one. And it was a mistake. And whoever approved it probably wants to do a do-over. And there needs to be this risk analysis before a campaign goes out like this, or before you tweet something like this, because we all know we're in a charged political environment. We're still going through Me Too to some degree. You know, we've seen the US in particular split badly, with both halves kind of moving further away from each other. And so there's a lot of risk in putting something like this out. And I think a proper analysis of this would have shown that, you know, regardless of whether it should be okay, or it should be understood, or it should be taken in context, that it probably wouldn't be. And so that's kind of the issue with me. And I want to go back to Maher's show here for a second. He had both comedian Larry Wilmore and Professor Scott Galloway on the show, and they both take different sides of this discussion. Larry Wilmore speaks first.
Bill, I'm going to have to call a foul on that play. I don't think this is a joke that's as good as you're saying that it is. You know?
No, it's an ad. It's not a monologue joke.
My colleague.
No, I know what you mean, but I mean, I hadn't seen that. If I just saw that, I'm like, what the fuck is Burger King doing?
But then you would read it. That's the point. It got your attention. That's what advertising is.
My colleague at NYU, I think, has the right take on this, and that gestures should be taken with the intent that they're given. And this was meant to highlight sexism. And
exactly.
Unfortunately, what we have, and my industry is guilty of this, we've created an industrial shaming culture where there's money in dunking on people and saying, making a caricature of comments and then using that to extract to an ugly place so you can get virtue points. Because the moment you're offended on our country, it means you're right. And where we have failed at universities is we need to be graduating not wokesters, but warriors.
You know, Ewan, I think, you know, Wilmore's reaction was probably the more common one out there, because he chuckled, you know, when Maher read the tweet, he chuckled and he wondered what Burger King was thinking. So he judged it right away, just based on that first tweet. And he was already, you know, in judgment land before he could even think about or hear the second one. And, you know, I would say that is unfortunate. I would like people to take things in context rather than out of context. But that's wishful thinking. You know, even if I would like that to happen, it's not going to happen. And so I wanted to point this out, and I'm going to give you a chance to chime in here in a sec. I wanted to point this out because in PR, I think we're often criticized for being too careful or trying to keep things safe, or for not taking risks, or, you know, trying to shy away from controversy or attention. And this bothers people sometimes, either in-house or even in terms of clients, where sometimes PR people see risk or see a potential problem where other people don't see those problems. And I think this is such a good example of that, you know, number one, yes, people should be able to understand nuance and intent. Number two, this should not have been a big deal. Number 3, Burger King should never have posted that because people don't get those things. And I really think that's kind of the clearest way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the segment, actually, that Maher segment that you're talking about, and I like Scott Galloway. I'm actually going to talk about a little bit later in the show. I'm going to talk about a fantastic article that I read of his, and I even get his argument. But first of all, let's step back and talk about the fact that we have 3 men talking about why this may or may not have angered women or men or anybody else. We don't exactly have a particularly diverse pool of individuals breaking down the issues here. That's sort of the first point. And then I'm gonna jump in there. I don't think that matters. Are you telling me that, like, how does that affect Burger King though? Like, they shouldn't have done it regardless. I mean, if there's a bunch of men that speak up against it, that's still a problem, right? I don't think Burger King is sort of segmenting its audience in terms of, men may feel this way, women may feel this way. I mean, that's not what I'm saying at all. All I'm saying is that in that particular clip that you played, we're getting a very specific and very particular perspective on the issue and on the ad itself. So my point is I don't necessarily deem that to be conclusive of anything.
See, I do, because even if women were perfectly fine, if there was a woman on that show who said this ad was fine for me, I still would say it's not fine, because it affects more than just women when something like this is tweeted out. It doesn't matter if anyone gets upset. If your brand is sort of dragged through the mud for this, that can be a perspective of a male or a female or someone who is black or white or Asian. It doesn't matter. It's damaging to the brand regardless. So to me, the fact that 3 men sitting there said they didn't like it, or one of them said he didn't like it and 2 liked it, to me, it doesn't matter. It still shouldn't have been tweeted regardless.
No, and I wouldn't disagree with the latter part of your point. All I'm saying is it would have been nice if in that particular segment we had a more diverse perspective on the issue. That's all that I'm saying. But here's the other thing that I find really interesting about this is because you provided the additional context of the second tweet, right? And you're right. The second tweet does provide some vital context to the initial tweet. Well, why was the first tweet then sent out separately? Why couldn't you have done it the other way? Burger King very easily could have sent out, for example, the second tweet first, which provides the context, and then closed with the line, "Women belong in the kitchen," within the context that they have rightly established as something that's actually progressive and supportive of women. But they chose not to do that. They chose not to do that, presumably for the very clear reason that they knew full well that sending out the first tweet was going to get more attention. And if they had sent the second tweet out first, it likely that message at the end likely would have got lost in the mix. But that really, to me, seems like a readily easy way that they could have addressed the issue, resolved the issue, and put forward the message that they ultimately wanted to put forward.
I think if you put "women belong in the kitchen" even at the end of the tweet, that's going to get a lot of attention. I don't think that would get lost in there. That is going to be picked out for sure. And I actually generally agree with your point, though. I don't think I would have put it at the end, but I would have put these 2 tweets together, at least, into one. You can say it off the top, even, followed by the rest of the material all within one tweet, because then it has to be taken in context. When you tweet it by itself, yeah, it does pull it away from the rest of the context to some degree. And look, like for me, I get so angry just in general about context being lost when people are angry about this or that, or quotes are always pulled out of context for people. And when they're trying to make points and things like that. And it drives me crazy because to me, it feels so dishonest. Like a lot of the times I feel like people do know the context, but they're pulling things out of context because they want to make a point. And it's challenging. I think it's wrong, but it's the environment that we live in. And so, I mean, that's why I say, like, personally speaking, I don't think this should have been an issue per se, but it is an issue. And it was a huge mistake for Burger King to do this. And it's hurt the brand. And yeah, I mean, they did get a lot of attention. I know they were trying to get attention, but there are ways, as you said just now, Ewan, to do this in a way that still gets some attention, but still just makes you seem a little bit more, I don't know, I don't want to use woke, but just a little more responsible in terms of how you communicate these sorts of things. And I think, Amazon made it switch very quickly and quietly. It was inadvertent. Burger King did this on purpose. And so this was a kind of lapse, a kind of a shocking lapse in judgment, I think, from either the company's marketing team or their PR agency, more likely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, presumably they sat in a room and had the discussion that we're having right now. And someone said, no. I mean, inevitably, this was the conclusion, right? Someone said, nope. I think the best way to go is to send out this first tweet and then we'll follow up with the second one. That was what someone decided was the best way to go. It also begs the question, Cam, and I mean, perhaps you know this, I don't. How quickly was the second tweet sent out?
It was right away. Yeah.
So there wasn't like there was a delay of a couple minutes where they're sort of trying to quickly comb the interwebs to get an immediate sense as to what the reaction was before pushing out the second one.
No.
Okay.
But I think you are right. I think that is probably how it happened. And I can hear people saying this. I think that point of view of, yeah, we're saying something outrageous, but it's in context of something really good that we're doing. And I can see people sitting around the table going, yeah, that's true. No, this is actually a good, this is a good program to bring more females into culinary careers. But yeah, it just wasn't done very well.
Wait a minute.
Check this out.
Whoa, hey, check this out. No, wait. Check it out.
I want you to check this out.
On the PR and Law podcast.
All right, Ewan, you said you've got some Scott Galloway stuff.
Yeah. Yes. Scott Galloway, he did a great piece for The Economist. This may be paywall depending on how many, free Economist articles you've read this month. But it's fantastic. It's such a great read. It's on recasting American individualism and institutions. And Scott Galloway, Cam, to give a little more context, because we've now talked about him a little bit. He's a professor at New York University's Stern School of Business. He's also the host of the Prof G and Pivot podcasts. Mm-hmm. And his most recent book is called Post-Corona: From Crisis to Opportunity, which I'm going to go and pick up a copy of now after reading this article. So many great quotes in here, Cam, but I mean, really to sum it up, Galloway's arguing that the emphasis placed on America's sort of rugged individualism that rose in the Reagan era and was sort of captured, Cam, in that famous, if you remember Reagan's famous declaration, he said, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Mm-hmm. Right. And Galloway sort of argues that this was the beginning of a 40-year assault on public sector institutions that were sort of carried out under, the banner of liberty and supposed self-reliance. And it's resulted in the gradual erosion of the very institutions that once made America exceptional. And again, he pulls out just some really, really crazy stats in this. So, I mean, one of the ones he pulls out that I wanted to mention, Cam, is American children born in 1940. They had a 92% chance of making more money than their parents by age 30. Only half of Americans born in 1984 achieved this. And he talks about his own anecdotal experience as well. So he says, despite being an unremarkable sort of lower middle class kid, that between the 1970s and the 1990s, because of California's public education system, he was able to attend primary school, university, and business school for a total of $10,000. And obviously finishing with solid credentials and a network to go out and become successful. And, he then goes on to sort of lead this into COVID and the idea that when COVID hit the US, it didn't find the sort of exceptional country that a lot of people still held it up to be. Instead, it sort of found a land, and this is a direct quote, instead it found a land of individuals too many of them poor, overweight, undereducated, and overly imprisoned. It found underfunded institutions and a population teeming with a sense of entitlement rather than community. It's a crazy read, Cam. One of the best articles I've read in a while. And this is definitely an issue that has just really stripped the United States of that idea of exceptionalism, that it was that high standard that it was once held to.
Yeah, and far be it for me to sort of argue with Scott Galloway, obviously. I think I quite like him as well. I think, you mentioned the 95% chance of earning more than your parents if you're born in 1930 versus the 80s. I think there's some context missing there too, though. I think if you're born in the 30s, it means you're coming of age in the post-war period where there was a huge...
Well, it was the 40s. He was born in 1940, had a 92% chance.
So huge post-war economic boom. So that seems to make sense. It's hard to say that's because of the institutions at the time. There was just a massive expansion economically at that time. And for the rest of it, I mean, I was actually thinking something similar, even recently. Just this belief that government is bad, and it's wasteful, and these thoughts really permeate a lot of discourse in the United States. And where did that come from? Why do people feel this way? And yeah, it tends to go back to Reagan and those 5 words that you mentioned, and those are really deeply ingrained in a lot of people. And as for the COVID thing, I mean, the only thing I'll say there is I was fully on board with everything he just said, except for the fact that since Joe Biden has been in the White House, things have turned around quite quickly. And there's a lot of vaccinations happening. America, I think, is leading the world at this point in terms of speed of vaccinations. And a lot of those vaccines were developed by U.S. companies. So there is a other side to it where things have kind of turned around a little bit when there's some competent people around. But I think his larger point still stands, obviously.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you. I mean, I think they've turned things around or turning things around. I think next to Israel, I think Israel has had the fastest vaccine rollout of any country in the world. But I think after that, they've done a good job. But at least from when it arrived, right? When it arrived in the US, that idea of, and we've seen this in terms of, all of the ridiculous examples, and it's not like the United States owns a monopoly on this. I mean, we've seen this in Canada, and we've seen this in a number of other countries as well. But even the anti-maskers that we've talked about on the show before, Cam, the idea that you can't tell me what to do. Right? I'm my own. I am an island, and you cannot tell me what to do. But that's really not how it works, because those individuals, they then get into their car, they then drive on the roads that are provided for by the state. They go and shop at markets where they're purchasing food that is safe because it's been regulated by the state. I mean, all of this state apparatus that is involved in their lives on a day-to-day basis, that really you cannot separate from yourself and the state. It is all part and parcel of the same thing. And to suggest that, you are this island unto yourself, and that you don't exist or coexist in this larger context of pre-existing institutions that enabled you to sort of enjoy that quality of life. It's completely naive, and something has somehow been lost in the rhetoric that those institutions are what have given us that quality of life rather than what is taking them away.
I think, like, even on the anti-mask thing, I think a general mask law was struck down in one of the states just because it is to tell people they have to wear something indoors in all cases is kind of, I can see why there's a bit of pushback there. But I think to sort of illustrate your point a bit, I mean, forget the fact that roads may have been financed by public funds or something like that. It's just that you have to wear a seatbelt, for instance, or you have to get insurance, or you have to, these kinds of things which are compelled behavior under the law. Or no shirt, no shoes, no service, going into restaurants. I mean, there have been restrictions like this around for a long time. And this is just the latest manifestation of it. Yet people accept all those other ones, just not this one. So it makes me think it's a little more political. I'm not going to go on mine. You and I finally saw Nomadland. I don't know if you have seen that or heard about it, but Chloe Zhao, the first woman of Asian descent to win a Golden Globe for directing. It's a fantastic film. Absolutely fantastic film. I highly recommend it. It's touching, it's emotional, but yet it's also very in tune with the times and sort of what it's like living in kind of the world that you were just talking about, Ewan, of this sort of so-called rugged individualism that's leaving some people behind. And it's absolutely an excellent film, and she very well could win an Oscar for it. So I just wanted to mention that.
Fantastic. Okay. I'll check that out.
Yeah, I can't remember which streaming service it's on. I think it might be Netflix, actually. We've got Hulu here now, which we've been using a lot recently. But anyway, go have a look for it. It is on one of the streaming services, so go find it. It's definitely worth it.
Cool. Okay, I will.
Anything else you want to mention, Ewan, before we wrap this up?
No, good show, Cam. Good show.
Yeah.
Some healthy debate.
Healthy
I like
discussion.
that. That's good.
Yeah, no kidding. Soon we're going to call it the Crossfire Podcast. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Don't miss a show. Please subscribe in your podcast app of choice or to our YouTube or SoundCloud channels, which are being updated. You can follow us on social media as well. And our newsletter at PRLawPodcast.Club. So for you and Christy, this is Cam McMurtry. Light it up.
This has been the PR and Law Podcast with Cam McMurtry and Ewan Christie. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. You can also join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by following our account at PR Law Podcast. That's all one word, PRLAW Podcast. Thanks for your support.